Hello, welcome to the AI Marketing Stack podcast. I am Rachel Roumeliotis from Punch Tape. This week was an interesting one again for AI and marketing, and we were going to cover a couple of different items before we get into the main interview. So, first of all, I wrote an article about all of the different spectrum of AI commercials that we saw at the Super Bowl. I found them really interesting, and I think the spectrum was from crap to AI chatbot commercials that were trying to show you that you needed them for your life, but also showed that life was really lonely. So I'm going to put that article, my 2 cents, in the description. So I thought that was interesting. Another point that I heard was made by Scott Galloway on the Pivot podcast. And he mentioned that the last time a technology was so front and center in the ads was a few years ago with cryptocurrencies, and it crashed right after that. So that's something to think about. I don't know if this means that AI is headed towards a crash or consolidation is really what I think more so, but we will see about that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was I saw an article which rang somewhat true to me. And this was just generally not necessarily about marketing, but we talk about a lot about marketing workloads and workflow in this. And so there's an article from the Harvard Business Review. AI doesn't reduce work, it intensifies it. And it's by Aruna Ranganathan and Xingqiu Maggie Yi. And it just came out on the 9th. And basically, what it says, paraphrasing here, is that AI lowers the bar to starting tasks that aren't necessarily in your wheelhouse, and that it makes it easier to start things so you actually end up doing more in the long run. Our findings suggest that without intention, AI makes it easier to do more, but harder to stop. So I think that goes along with when you're onboarding AI into whatever you're doing for work, be intentional, look at bringing it on in small places where you know you can save time, and then be really thoughtful about how you then take that time, if any, that you get back and how you use it. So that's it for this week. Sort of my thoughts. We have as our interview Pierre DeBois, a lovely gentleman. He is the founder and CEO of Zamana, an analytics services firm. He's also a writer for CMS Wire, which is where I found him. He had written an article, I think, for around marketers and what they need to know in 2016. I was really shocked to see some really technical things on there, like MCP and RAG workflows. Both of these two technologies are very important to AI, and he goes into them a little bit. But so I thought we'd have him on and see what his perspective was and sort of how he's using, um, you know, in his workflow. He's also an adjunct professor at a couple of different college and a university. And yeah, so I'll leave you with that. I'll see you next time and enjoy the interview. Okay. Hello again, listeners. I am here in our third episode ever of the AI Marketing Stack podcast. And I am so very pleased to be with Pierre DeBois, who I found in looking across the internet all about, as I usually do, AI and marketing. He had written an article where he had a list of things that marketers should know in 20, but that I was surprised how technical it was. Surprised and delighted, I should say. And so I was like, we got to get this guy on here. And so here he is. Hello. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate having a chance to talk.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. So, first question is as we were kind of leading up to, marketers do need to know about AI, right? Not just on a surface level. So, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that are still sort of hanging out there around what using AI actually means?
That's a good question, and I think the biggest misconception right now is that there's this sort of push to use AI without a lot of thought about making adjustments on AI. Most people right now are sort of saying hearing the message of we need to use AI to build our skills. but they're being told in a way that's very generic in a lot of ways and not very imaginative. And it's sort of a catch 22. If you are a if you're a Google manager listening or Anthropic manager listening or somebody from OpenAI maybe listening to this, I think the message that people are hearing is not really giving an imagination on what they can do with it in terms and I think people are getting a little bit better with that, but at the same time, they're not getting into sort of details on where they can play into that. And so it gives this impression that you have to be this super savvy technologist to be able to use the tool. And it's not really about that at all. But there are some things that you should be playing with in terms of settings, in terms of, and definitely in terms of when you get to agent development, there's some things that you can do to help guide that development at the end of the day. So I think that part is where we need to be pushing, particularly now as AI has been around for a few years. We've heard some of the messages about prompting, but we need to hear a little bit more about what we should be what we should.
Yeah, and this following up on your CMSY article, it basically is like it's surprising to me. Like 5 years ago, I don't think I would have been like, I need to know about agents, but I do think that the bar for technical literacy has risen quite a bit. Um, but I don't, well, last episode, we actually had a gentleman that thought there might be a role for like go to market engineers. So that's really interesting. But I think for, Joe and Joanna marketer, I don't think it's time to like break out the programming languages, but it might be time to think about vibe coding or sort of like diving in. Where do you think that line is? What's the baseline? Let's put it that way. What's the baseline that like marketers should know about? Like maybe like different categories.
I think the biggest one is trying to give when you're giving guidance for AI or agentic AI tools, it's thinking a little bit about how do you structure your suggestions in terms of media and things that you would typically use. And a lot of these are really, to be honest with you, are things that you use every day. For example, I use a Claude project
Hmm.
for a lot of writing and content that I've put together to help kind of sort through how to phrase things initially. And the guidance I gave it was PDFs of my original writings, PDFs of technical documents,
Yep.
PDF. These are things that you have at hand as a marketer that you can create just using with Word and maybe or Google Docs these days, basically. That type of structure are things that you can help put together for projects, for RAG. That's another one we'll get into in a moment.
Hmm.
But what you want to do as a marketer is, even if you're working with a development team, is to get a sense of what instructions that you want to have on the model. That's one part of it. But then the second is how do certain tools in that development will accept those instructions? And most of these are just, like I said, they're ranging from Markdown has gotten a renewed interest because that's been
Yeah.
involved for things. There's outputs in JSON that for some of the APIs that could be
I've seen
helpful.
that.
And then even if you're not that technical on those two, even just again with projects and with simple where you're adding information at the prompt, you can use PDFs. Images actually is a good one. I'll give a real quick hint. I actually use my smartphone to take pictures of my notes. My notes are sometimes handwritten.
Ooh, I haven't done that.
Oh yeah, you can take a picture, snapshot it, and then upload it into a prompt to give you to help give instruction to your AI. And the AI, and a lot of AIs, particularly Claude, is very, very good at taking that instruction and crafting around either written text or some instructions around that. So you have a lot of tools around you as a marketer. It's just a matter of organizing those inputs in a way that either your model can understand it, or if you're trying to do something with the developer and creating an agent, creating the content in a format that the agent will understand either in testing and training
Mm.
or later on when it's output.
That's an A+ tip because I'm going to use that. That is fantastic. And
Yeah.
I agree with you. The Claude stuff, I actually fell in love with like 2 weeks ago only and was like, oh my God. So, I mean, I do think it's as easy as jumping in there and then, finding out tips like, hey, it can take your notes too, which I think is fantastic, right? So, two of the topics that surprised me were MCP, which I'm familiar with both of these, but because I worked at Intel, MCP and RAG. And I wonder if you can Just give super high level definition to people who might not know what those are and explain why marketers should know about
Okay, let me give you the 10,000 view
them.
of
Yeah.
this. Most people are aware of Claude and ChatGPT and Gemini, and that they put together a prompt. They may, and to what we just talked about, they may have a couple of things that they may add to that prompt submission. It goes to the model. The model then breaks everything down as tokens and then puts together a response that statistically should be relevant to what your prompt is. That's supposed to be the answer. The challenge with this is that it's still there's a couple of things. It's still very statistical in nature when you break down the tokens, meaning that you're looking at likelihood. Think regression, think anything with advanced statistics where you're looking at the likelihood of something happening. Think of if you want a real life example, think of a Hail Mary where it's a low percentage play. People still, quarterbacks still try to make that attempt in late in the fourth quarter. We saw that, or my thing, Bears or the Rams, that whole thing would collapse. Where you see these plays at the end, and people cheer it. It's a low percentage play, but people appreciate that the quarterback is still trying, even though the chances
Hmm.
of actually connecting with that receiver is slim. So it's the idea that when you're crafting your notes or crafting your prompt, there's still a slim chance that some things may not connect well, or that it may elaborate in ways that you didn't really want. And actually, one technical, I wouldn't call him a guru, but he's a really good developer. Talks on YouTube, talks about averaging out. The idea that the text you get, for example, is just designed for the average person. It's just like burgers are designed to serve everybody, but doesn't have the nuance juices
Sure.
that you have to make it favorable. So where RAG and MCP come into play is that there are two different ways of putting that extra flavor in there and also grounding the material, so that way that output is more precise, it's more
Hmm.
to your liking, and maybe even more valuable to you in
Hmm.
terms of what it's producing, whether it's text, images, and so forth. So the first one, MCP, is just basically a protocol that lets you work with other tools, that lets that model access those tools and create something of more value for you. So it's actually, think of it as the waiter in your restaurant who has taken your order, but that waiter knows that you need to have extra spices to make that steak taste better, to make the salad go better with the ranch dressing and everything else. So it's going to particular tools specified that will allow you to add more material. That's a general concept for MCPs. There's a lot of them out there now, almost thousands of them, ranging from some that were issued from particular companies for their particular software. So you can
Hmm.
have something like even from Adobe, or even I believe there's a Google Analytics MCP as well, if you're
Okay.
specific. So there's a lot of them out there to play with. So there's that. That's first. Now, RAG is a little different. RAG is, for lack of a better term, is kind of like a very specialized data source. Retrieval augment, I forgot what the G stands for.
Generation.
Generate.
Generation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
So what happens is that when that model, so where the MCP is looking at different tools, it kind of almost like an API going to these different softwares and
Yes.
so forth. RAG contains information that you, the user, have understood it to be ground information, things that you know that you shouldn't do. Think of it as, to our football analogy, you know where the lines are where you cannot pass the ball, and you know that
Right.
you are afraid that if you pass it a certain way that you're grounding the ball, that type of thing. You have certain things that you need to kind of that don't need to be recalculated over and over again. And for an AI model, it provides the advantage of not having to re-guess at that over and over again and making it subject to
That's
that.
a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So for RAG, you have documents that you provide, and these could be in various formats. They sit in vector, sort of a vector database, and a model accesses those and reasons with it before it produces its final result for you. So that's kind of where the MCP and the RAG falls into play. Think of them as augmenting solutions that help kind of confine and direct your model to a specific answer, rather than making it so general and so flat that it's not quite as useful for you in your process, or for for your uh, for your agentic AI, for that matter as well.
Very good. No, I mean, I think it's good to know about this stuff because it's almost like knowing the basics of your car. Like, I'm not a mechanic, right? But I understand that there's a transmission. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. And I think so. This comes to the next thing, right? So we're like, as marketers, we're not going to be developers, most of us, right? But you are going to work with developers within your company, right? I mean, so I think knowing about those terms helps you communicate better with developers, honestly, too, when they're telling you about what the solutions are, having some sense of like bridging that chasm between business speak and technical speak. So the other thing that came up when we spoke about this was so working with developers, and then it was more about, and this is not a new thing, but it's adjacent to AI. This idea that like, we work with data, right? And how do you, and this might involve the developer, it might not. How do you propose questions or experiments, etc.? Like how do you ask the right questions? Right? When you're dealing with like, great, you've got a CRM full of customer data. It's fantastic. If you don't ask the right question, is it really helpful? So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that, your experience there.
I would say, yeah, it could be tricky, but I think the first thing is don't feel embarrassed that it's not precise. Think of it this way, going to your car analogy, I worked at Ford for 8 years. I can tell you off the bat, not everyone knew how to drive a stick. And still
Sure.
probably has gotten worse now over the years since I've been there, but that doesn't, not knowing how to drive a stick doesn't disqualify you for engineering an automobile. Most people, what they're doing is they usually are coming up with a list of things. And then the first thing I would say as a marketer is when you're developing that list of what you want in your system for your agent to deal with, you may want to start thinking about what things should be measured.
Mm.
That sets up two things for you. It gives you a sense of performance from the agent, in particular, if you're doing an AI agent and they're working with a RAG and MCP. It also helps you to figure out like what sort of thing. It also sets up quality for you as well. You don't want. I'm going to use that football analogy. We love the Hail Marys, but we know, as even if you're not familiar with football, a Hail Mary is something you expect in the fourth quarter, maybe within the last 2 minutes of a game. You don't expect that at first quarter within the first minute.
Hmm.
One is a little bit more preferable. The second is similar, but the timing of it is not what you want. So it's the same sort of thing I think as a marketer you want to think about in terms of when you're giving these ideas. One part we mentioned about medium and how it's formatted, but I think the other part of it is thinking about what's measurable in terms of how many times should an agent um uh uh how many times they say thank you where it's becoming more annoying to the customer
Yeah, yeah.
rather than just saying, being a service. How many times, what's the latency time for retrieving information that agent needs to have to answer the customer's query? Even an idea of what queries come up as a starting point can help you with the training of an agent or model supporting that agent. So I would say it's about measurement, I think, and that measurement again could be length of time for responding to something. It doesn't have to be a hard number. It could just even be the question of how frequently should this be dealt with. I think even having an idea as a starting point gives everyone a starting point at least, because you can always optimize later as that system evolves and as it's being put into review. But getting a sense of what should be quantified is a big deal. And I think even, again, what are the documents that may even support some of your answers may be of help to you again, because then you could look at it and say, here's a question that's going to be asked. And I know that this sort of information on, let's say, maybe the latest printer from HP. I know that for service information or questions that come up, I need to have a document ready to help troubleshoot for the customer and get some accuracy on what to suggest when we're troubleshooting in that dialogue. So those are
Right.
the things you really have to imagine. I know that marketers think about that a little bit, but I think now with AI, it's forcing a little bit more discussion because the sophistication now can go back and forth in a way that a chatbot probably would not have done like 3 or 4 years ago.
I
So
think there's two things. Yeah, I think it's the being able to impact what we've talked about here. First of all, I feel like we're talking about all the different puzzle pieces of a marketing tooling ecosystem, right? And kind of looking at it from different ways. And I feel like the impact that non developers can have or at least speak to is more accessible. And that is very exciting to me. It is. It's very exciting to me to see. I mean, we'll see where we are in 5 years. So, with this whole ecosystem of AI tools, right? everything's AI, 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 right? How do you evaluate, I don't know, if it really is AI? Like we talked about very specific things that I would consider AI, like it's connected, agents are connected via MCP. RAG is a certain type of AI workflow. What should people be looking for, I guess, when they're sort of on the market? What are there keywords? Are there different places where you're seeing like AI marketing workflows that are truly AI driven, like in the world right now?
I think there's still a lot that are emerging right now, more than
Mm,
anything else. There's been a big to do about return on investment. I honestly think it's a little early.
okay,
AI in general is an engineered product. And when you
fair
have an
enough.
engineered product, does not they usually don't give a return the first time that you're trying to get it out there. Automakers are savvy about this. They
Hmm.
spend 4 years. They've played with the clock, to be honest with you, in the last like 20 years or so, but it's still roughly 4 years. But they spend 4 years developing a vehicle that, if you stop and think about it, it has to be, you have to think 4 years into the future of what
Hmm.
that market is
Very
looking
good
for.
point. Yeah.
And then what's worse is that if you don't get certain things right, you're stuck with architecture for at least 4 years to try to get a return out of that. There's a lot of history in automobiles that are about that. Ford Mondeo, which was sold as the Contour. This is going back to like the 90s and
I
so
was going to
forth.
say that's not recent.
Yeah, this is an old one, but it's a good example. It was designed more for European audiences, but Ford at that time was trying to come up with a world car to cut costs, meaning that the manufacturing and some of the hard points were similar whether the car was built in Europe or in the United States.
Okay.
The end result was they had a good car, but one of the criticisms was the rear seat room was not quite that great. But they had locked in on the wheelbase and therefore the amount of space that they could play with foot room. So those sort of things happen for automobiles all the time, basically. You're locked in because and it's probably happening more than often. They've gotten better, but it's the idea that you can always play with so many things on a platform just because of space. Fast forward to AI, we don't have metal when we're crafting an AI model. But there are things that you have to be careful about in terms of development that takes time to let that model understand what the boundaries are, what sandbox and context is, and what works for you. Most of everybody right now is getting better at it, but we're still seeing a lot of wheel spin, and we're probably going to see that now. Now that MCPs are part of the language, we're just
Hmm.
now, to be honest, with
Yeah,
just getting
for
a
sure.
grasp. So it's what I say to managers is it is going to be a challenge, but you have to work with your exec team to understand what are the things that, and you need to be clear about. I would say don't come in and just say, hey, we got a lot of wheel spins, going to take a lot of time. Be clear about what those parameters are and what the impact is on customer experience. That's the biggest thing I think that's the biggest thing you can do right now, because what you're doing is you're showing that you are yeah, there's a lot of wheel spin, tires are smoking to try to get this whole AI vehicle moving forward,
Right.
but you also are understanding what's causing that a little bit. And I think that's the part. I think that's right now the best defense I think any marketing exec or manage or marketing team can have right now, because a lot of times people at the exec level, they know that they're implementing something, but not everybody at the exec level understands AI from or software, if you want to be real about it, from an implementation standpoint. They may have hints and pieces of the terms, but they may not have the experiences on how these things can take a little bit of time and how they can turn around in that time as well. That's it's kind of a it's to me, it's an engineered product, but the benefit is we don't have metal, so we're not stuck with like a physical thing for a
It's
long time.
changing. Yeah.
But you also, it may be changing in a way that you have to kind of keep up with, that your team may not cannot afford. You may have some people who can't afford to keep up with it all the time just because it's changing so much. So you're kind of, I think marketers are at kind of that nexus of keeping up with things on behalf of their executive team, but also kind of managing it a little bit. And I think those are the things that everyone's going to be learning at least this year if they haven't learned it last year.
Yeah, I like the idea of how you put it. It's what is the impact to the customer? I think that's sort of like a great way to sort of lead any experiments or which way you're going to go with something. And that's why I just think the education is much better so that if an executive comes to you and is like, how are we using AI, which definitely comes up and I get that question, you can say here is where we're using it and be specific and talk about what the goal is and how that impact. So I think again, it's sort of like translating it. So I want to end with, and we've kind of peppered this sort of happens in the interview. What can someone, I like to ask, what can someone do in the next couple of days that puts them on a good path to having AI augment what they're doing?
I think the simplest is using the project features, and I've mentioned
Okay.
a little bit about this before.
Yeah.
There's
Claude one. Yeah.
every Claude literally calls it Claude Project.
Okay.
OpenAI for ChatGPT, it's the custom GPTs. There's a performance name, and I can't think of it off the bat, for a Gemini that kind of falls into it. But what all of these are, they all, no matter the name, they all have the same common. There is a section where you can highlight specific instructions, and these are things that you know they're going to repeat for the types of projects you do. So for writers, for example, Claude Project, you can put in an instruction saying, "Here's a format that I use that should match for writing on Medium, which is a platform, or
Yep.
Substack, which is a platform, right? Or for a publisher, if you have a publishing team, and you can put in there PDFs. Again, like I said, I'm giving my secret sauce away here, but I have done taking a picture of my hand notes and putting it up there as well too. And what you're doing is setting aside a certain part of memory for the AI to reason with that first, and then start crafting some either draft suggestions, ideas, title suggestions, but it's doing it in a format that is familiar to you such that you don't have to keep asking over and over again.
It's like repeatable structure. I have done the same thing, like a blog content creator. I just think it's magical. But like same idea, right? Like you kind of teach it, but if you're doing something repeatable, this is what I like about this instead of every time to your point going in and being like, "Okay, it's a blog this week." There are certain parameters, things that you always wanted to know. And I think of them as baby apps. That's probably not the right
Yeah,
wording, but
that actually is a good way of thinking of it. Yeah.
yeah, I love it. So that I think that's a really good one, actually,
Yeah.
because and the other thing is you can just experiment. Doesn't mean like you're gonna go turn that in. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like there still needs like some humanity in there.
Yeah, and I think this is the part also that I think that's essential. I don't want to make it sound like throw everything to the side and then rush out on it, because if you're trying to, let's say, like from my area, I'm doing presentations and they're based off of some of my articles. Some of my articles for Medium are very, very technical.
Yeah,
Still need to have AI can produce an outline, but I still need to go over that to see how that's going to look on a
of course.
slide. And I know that there are other things like SlideX, SlideDev, for example, that you can upload the markdown of your
Mhm.
output and it will create the slides for you. But you still need to kind of go over that entirely, because, as I mentioned earlier, there's a tendency to make an average for AI to create the most average, widely consumable
Yeah.
answer, which may sound okay, it may be technically okay, but it may not. It may make you sound more drier than usual, basically.
Yeah.
So
It's
so
a
you do
base.
yeah, yeah, it's a root. If you're making
Yeah.
gumbo, it's your root. So you have to kind of really understand like what root you're working with, what are the vegetables and meats you want to add on to it. And I think the other thing is that I know for Claude is a really good one, because Claude is Anthropic has really pushed the technology part aspects of Claude. This is why you see Claude code and so forth. But
Mm.
just as busy professionals, you need something that can kind of streamline your workflow just enough so you can work maybe on editorial craft ideas rather than going through the structure over and over again.
Mm.
So you want to look for workflows like that. And I think, and then plus they're shareable. That's the other thing too. To a
Right.
certain extent, I could share across projects with Claude, and you can share that with your team. So you can get your teams on a certain note and make it so much easier for everyone to kind of coordinate with each other a little bit more about the material and how it's presented. And I think that part would be extremely helpful.
I think that's a great one. It's wonderful. So I want to thank you for your time. I think this was great. I love getting your perspective. I love hearing about the automobile sort of like case studies. I think that's a great different perspective. So thank you so much. And I will put a lot of links to what we talked about in the description so you can follow up and you can follow Pierre. But thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you for having me. This has been a treat.
Awesome.